The views and opinions expressed in the following program are those of the hosts and guests, and not necessarily those of the staff or management of Worldwide Digital Broadcasting Corporation.
Rise! Get yourselves together! Rise! Stand up and live your life! Rise! Get yourselves together! Rise! Hands up high!
Welcome to the Rise Above Show. I am Joe Peroni.
And I'm Heidi Mancini. And today we want to thank our partners for the Rise Above Show, Meal Prep Vegas. Their phone number is 624-9286, area code 702. Meals are made healthy and fresh, and she also delivers, Marie. And their website is www.mealprepvegas.com. So if you wanted to go on there, you could check out the different food varieties that she has, and she has a menu plan, and their phone number is there also on the website. Also, City Athletic Club, 7980 West Sahara Avenue. Their phone number is 702-675-3900. If you'd like a gym membership, you can call that number and speak to somebody about joining their gym. Also, I have another announcement for Sunday, December 3rd. It's this Sunday from 9 to 3 p.m. Aerial Fitness will be at City Athletic Club. They are sponsoring a blood drive. So if you wanted to donate blood, there's a website. If you go to, you can either call United Blood Services at 1-877-827-4376, or you can make an appointment to give blood at https:/Google 1ZKMGY or www.bloodhero.com, and you can sign up under Aerial Fitness and donate. It's blood drive. So the school will be out there on Sunday from 9 to 3 doing all kinds of entertainment, Aerial Fitness, dancing. There'll be singers there, all professional people, so it'll be a fun day.
And John might even film it. We'll get him on it.
We'll get him on. There you go.
I get blood all the time.
You do?
Hmm?
I know. She wanted to know if I was going to get blood, and I said, I don't know. I'll think about it. I don't know. I never gave blood before. I always get my blood taken, but I've never donated blood before.
Really?
I have. Yeah.
I don't know. I just am scared of it. I don't even know how much blood they take out of you, but if it's more than 8 vials or something, I don't know if I could do it.
It's a pint.
Yeah, it's a pint. Yeah. You don't feel it.
How big is a pint? Is it this size? Oh, that's it?
Yeah.
Oh, I have more blood than that taken out of me when I have my annuals.
Yeah, I bled that much just today.
It's a little bag.
You know what always scares me, though, and I shouldn't say this on the air, is I'm always afraid I'm going to get somebody that doesn't know what they're doing, and they get in there and they do all this, like, moving around and shimmying around with a needle.
That never happens.
That never happens?
Nah.
No, they're great at it.
No.
No, that never happens.
They practice on oranges.
Yeah, for a really long time, too.
Okay. Well, anyway, that's going to be going on the 4th annual Area Fitness Blood Drive and Show. So you go donate blood, and there's also a show, and there'll also be gift certificates and prizes and things given out so that you can go home with some free stuff.
Where?
At City Athletic Club. And that, again, is at 7980 West Sahara Avenue. And they'll be sponsoring the event on Sunday from 9 to 3, December 3rd.
All right, so our show today is on resilience. And so why do we want to do a show on resilience? Because, okay, let's start from here. You can be as intelligent as anybody in the world. You could be super strong, physical, mental, all that stuff. But if you're not resilient, you're not going to go anywhere. You're not going to rise above anything, because everybody has a downtime. Mm-hmm. Everybody needs to get over a loss in some type of way. And so the idea is how we can grow from a loss and make it better. So in everyday language, when we talk about resilience, we talk about bouncing back from something, like a rubber band, bouncing back real quick. But really, that's not the way it works. I've got a definition. The American Psychology Association would say that resilience is adapting well in the face of trauma, adversity, or a tragedy. Or what I would say is minimizing the negative effects of an adverse situation. Again, most people talk about it as bouncing back real quick. But the way it kind of works in the world, and the real truth of it is that most people, when they go through trauma, it's not a quick thing to bounce back from. We're talking about growing up in a family, let's say if there's a divorce. That's not something you bounce back from real quick. That's going to affect your life in a lot of different ways for a long time. We're talking about if you have somebody in your family who's an alcoholic, physical abuse, emotional abuse, these types of things. These are long-term adversities that you don't just snap back from. And when you have long-term adversity or these childhood traumas, what happens is it changes your belief system, and you start to buy into that at a very young age. So we could talk about it as changing your life script. In other words, if somebody in your life was not good to you, you may not trust many people at all. So as it goes down, we have to figure out a way, so how can we minimize the damage as we go so we can be successful later on down the road. So what I did was I looked up some scholarly stuff, and stuff going back a long time. We're talking 40 years ago. I've got a book that was put out in 1962. And what they did was they actually traced over 40, 50-year period of time what happens to people throughout the time. And they took the percentage of successful people and they said, well, what are the common denominators? What did those people do? What did they think? And how did they run their life in order to be successful? What do you think so far?
Well, I'm interested to see what those studies were and what the differences were.
I'll start with one, but I also want to make it personal, if we can, because I don't like those shows either where they just do straight lectures. To me, that gets boring. You can go to school for that, right? And it's okay to do, and you can look it up yourself, by the way. But I like to make it a little more technical because some of these things I found so interesting. Because in some ways I thought, well, am I resilient? Or was I at certain times in my life? And I thought, yeah, the times when I was really resilient, there were things that I noticed then that is actually in the studies. But I never thought of it back then. And if you think about a lot of younger people today, what they're doing is they're so much into this social media that every time they do something good, they want people to know about it. And that really takes away from it, because the first thing on the list of how to develop resilience is to have an internal locus of control, meaning that you care about yourself. You care about what you want to do. You make the goal, and any rewards, they don't really matter. What matters is the reward inside yourself. And I thought about that, and I'm like, wow, that's so true. That's number one on the list. And yet you see people today in a total social media world. And then you add that, and then I go, well, okay, how much resilience am I seeing in the outside world right now? Very little. You know, that's why we have a drug epidemic. You know, that's why we have a suicide epidemic. So that's another reason why I want to do the show today, is because at the heart of it, at the root, is a lack of resilience. And as you look through the paperwork, I think you can actually teach it. I don't think you have to be born with it. So let me show you this.
Well, not to
go ahead.
interrupt you, but I think part of the problem the reason we're having problems today is because of accountability factors too, with the
True.
resilience and resiliency behavior. Because if you're not held accountable, then they don't feel the need to be resilient to move on, because you're
That's
not
true.
being held accountable for your negative or positive. I think social media is not as, I think it's not as bad as we want to paint it all the time. I think it does perpetuate the negatives that are out there, but I also think that there is some social media out there that can help with resiliency and can help, you know, people that are in crisis to, you know, resiliency comes from the type of person that you are inside. But I also think that when you have people around you, that it's not outside validation, but it's people that you know at least can guide, or they're caring about where you're going. There's a difference
Right.
between that and outside validation. And
Yeah.
some of the social media that we do see, is negative, and it can be self-serving. But there is some social media out there that there's really some genuine, authentic people out there trying to, be available. But,
Right.
So it just depends on what you're trying to.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. It's kind of like, okay, so you have this young child, and let's say their brain is a blank slate. And I think you're right. If you put nothing into it, or mush, or negativity, and then you add social media, you're going to get results not so good. But I think you're right. I think there's a lot of great things on social media too. I like to think we're part of that, right? So we're trying to do something positive. And I actually do like social media, because I could find a lot of great information, and I could look up a lot of great people, and you can actually have kind of conversations with people you never thought you could ever get in contact with in your whole life. Mm-hmm. And it's really great in that sense, but I think you have to have that structure and that base.
Well, when you mentioned earlier about teaching resilience, I think that you do teach it. I think that everybody's born with a certain amount of whatever you're born with, but I think that you can teach a person to be resilient by sometimes your actions, and especially parents, because as a parent, when you go through things, or and your children go through things, we as moms and dads, we want to micromanage our kids. And when you do that, when you are doing that, there's the best intentions that are there, mm-hmm. but you don't allow your child to develop the skills to be resilient, to kind of, if they're being made fun of, kind of a thing. It's not our responsibility to go into the school all the time and yell at the bully and handle all these problems for them. That seems to be a big thing right now.
Right.
It's not a parent's job to handle those kind of situations. It's maybe to model for them. Well, maybe you could handle it this way when you go to school. These are the tools I'll give you. You can bring this to your counselor, or maybe this is what you could say to those kids that are doing these things. So I think resiliency, when you're not taught how to overcome, and it's coping, which is another word for resiliency. I think that's why we do have a problem with drugs and alcohol, because I had this discussion the other day with somebody that they want to always say that it's inherited, and it's not really inherited. It's a learned behavior. If you see your mom or your dad, when times get tough, they reach for the bottle, or they reach for the pot, or they reach for their prescription meds, whatever they do. I mean, whatever it might be. It could be porn. So people go and sit in their computer for hours a day and just veg out on a computer. They're modeling behaviors that they may have seen. Right. When my mom's upset, this is what she does. When my dad's upset, he goes to the bar. And that's an adaptation that they inherit that way. I don't think it's chemically. But there's a lot of debate on that, because a lot of the old literature still states that it's inherited, so people believe mm-hmm. that. And I think as long as people believe that, it also gives them no accountability, because then they go, well, what am I supposed to do? I inherited alcoholism. I inherited drug abuse. I was born, a drug addict baby, so what do you expect? Because there's old ways they counsel that they still say that it's a genetic defect.
I think it gives them a way out. One of the things I looked up this week, and this person was talking about, I forgot his name, but he was talking about a parable, that he heard in church. And they were talking to two people, and there were two brothers. And they both had, the same family, obviously. And the thought was, okay, so they came from a family where they saw the father beating up the mother on a consistent basis. It was very, very abusive. He was also an alcoholic, and then when she was there, she of course was drinking too, to get out of the whole thing emotionally. Mm-hmm. And so it was extremely abusive from top down. The parents were not engaged in any way, shape, or form in a loving way with each other or with the kids. But then they interviewed the two brothers when they were 30 years old. One was a model citizen, good family that he created, right? Mm-hmm. He chose a good person in his life and had kids. He was doing the right thing. He had a full-time job. They had the other person who was an abusive human being, terrible human being, in and out of jail. The question posed to both of them was, how did you get to be like that? They said, well, with parents like I had, how could I be any different? Well, they both said the same thing. So the point is one person was using as an excuse to say, listen, my father was a terrible human being, abusive, didn't know how to treat women. So that's what I became. The other one said, I saw it. It wasn't a good thing at all. It was terrible, and I wanted to be the opposite mm-hmm. of that. So if you give somebody a way out, sometimes they'll take it. Sometimes if you just take that away and just sink or swim, most people will swim. It's like when you look in the animal kingdom, and when I want to get motivated or inspired, I put on those like National Geographic things, and you'll see like an old lion, right? And he's got a little limp. He doesn't go to his lion friends and say, hey, listen, could you float me a couple of antelopes for the weekend? Because I can't really hunt very well right now. He's got to go out there and he's got to fake it that he's not hurt, and he has to go out there and do the hunting. And when you do that, and when you have that, again, we'll use the psychology terms, that internal locus of control. You're not looking over your shoulder to be bailed out all the time. Your chances of success are not 100%, but it's definitely higher than if you walk around saying, please, I'm a victim, can somebody else help me? Because there's not somebody always there to help you. And even if they are there to help you, what kind of self-esteem do you get when you just sit there with open arms all the time saying, okay, listen, I need help from everybody, you know? John.
Doesn't it all come down to a matter of choice?
I believe it is.
That we can choose to be this way or we can choose to be that way. We all make decisions based on, the whole nurture-nature argument,
Right.
But we're influenced by our environment and our
Absolutely.
genes both.
True.
But we make the conscious choice which way we want to go,
Right.
Yeah,
I agree with that. I think you would say that all decisions are voluntary,
Yes.
right? I mean, no matter what, they're all voluntary. So I would go with that. In terms of my nature, and I've looked this up only because it's bothered me for so long, is why is it that I never get over my shyness? Like, even when I'm in the middle of talking and I feel like I know what I'm talking about and everything's going well, there's still that part of me that's still I still feel it. I'm always that way. And so I looked up, and it's partly genetic.
Yeah.
And then I look at my father, and my father's way worse than me. Like, because he's never fought through his shyness. And so I started looking, I go, yeah, it's in my family. There's no doubt. And I could say part of it's learned. There's no doubt. Like, because if I was out when I was a kid with my father and there was something to be said to somebody, my father would probably take the quieter way out, and not confront somebody straight up. And so you learn some of that. But I know through the way I feel inside that as much as I fight it, there's no doubt that there's some genetic predisposition, but that doesn't give me the excuse not to talk. It doesn't give me the excuse not to tell people I care about them when I do. It doesn't give any excuse. Like, even now, am I nervous before we get on the air? We've been doing this for 5 years. I don't know if my anxiety level has gone down at all. It's still the same amount. I function, but it's still something I fight. So I can have 100% empathy for people that are fighting some genetics, if there's genetics there for them. But on the other hand, listen, in the real world, nobody cares. And I mean that for me too, right? Nobody's going to say, listen, oh, don't worry, he's shy. Because he's shy, he doesn't have to do this, this 5-minute speech in front of a class. No, they made me do it anyway. When
Well,
was
I
in
think
school, I
you
had to
get
do plays.
resilience from it. I think it makes you more resilient.
That's
That
exactly right. That's the
instead of like
resilience
totally
factor.
freezing up, you do it, but you do it with reservation, and you do it with maybe the fear thing. I am not. I don't know if I'm shy or not. I'm shy in certain situations, and when I was younger, and in school, I was very quiet. So, but at home I wasn't. At home, everybody knew I was there and whatever. But when I was in school, and I don't know, as I got older, I started to become more verbal. And I don't know if it was because of the doing hair. I don't know if
See,
there
that
was.
would be rough if you were
there-
shy and you're.
you can't be a hairstylist if you're shy and you can't have a conversation. But I think what did it for me and what made me resilient was when I worked in a nursing home. That was my very first job that I had. And I was scared to death. I was like, I don't know nothing about these old people, or all the old people I ever knew were old and crotchety. And I was like, what are you doing? But I needed a job. Like, I needed money. I wanted to get a car. And I go, okay, McDonald's wasn't cutting it. I lasted 2 weeks and I quit. So I said, I got to get some kind of work where I could get some benefits. And honest to God, I remember walking in there scared to death. I mean, it's a totally, all I could say to you is when I was 19, I graduated when I was 17, and I was 19 when I worked there. To walk into that kind of environment with, not everybody was out of their mind, but, the first part that I worked in, it was the nursing part. So those people were pretty sick and they were a little crazy, some of them. And then later on, I worked with people that were more independent. But I just remember going, oh my God, like you cannot, like you got to have a conversation with these people. How are you going to? And I remember the first old lady giving me so much grief and yelling at me and telling me I'm this, getting me in trouble like every other day because she said I was not cleaning her room right and stuff. And I remember going, I'm going to have to stick up for myself because if I don't, I'm not going to have a job. So I remember going in her room, closing the door and saying to her, I'm here to stay. I need this job. I've done nothing to you. I said, if you have a problem, you need to tell me and then I'll correct it. But I'm here to stay. So we better figure out a way to get along because I don't appreciate you turning me into my supervisor every day, you know. So it was kind of like, you know, I don't know what it was, but I think getting me out of my environment of, you know, just being, I putting myself in an environment that wasn't comfortable. And I think that's what builds resiliency too. You know, even walking into
You cared enough.
Gold's Gym. I mean, there's so many instances in my life when I could look back and go, this made me more resilient. You know, the challenges when I got behind the chair doing people's hair, and it's not always everybody's nice to you and they're sweet and they're happy. You know, you have that time when you got to have the conversation with that irate client that doesn't like a service or they paid too much or, you know, you're late walking in the door a couple minutes and they freak out, you know, whatever. But I can look back at different times in my life where I could say certain situations, if I wouldn't have stepped out of my comfort zone and said, I'm going to do this. And I remember walking into Gold's Gym was another time for me when I was like, I was scared to death. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to leave out that door the way I came in because these people, everybody in there was in shape. You know, it was just a totally different, it was people, I didn't know a soul in there, you know, and I remember just going, okay, let's try it out and see what happens. And it ended up being a good thing for me.
Here's something. I don't even think I ever told you this. This is so embarrassing. This is the life of a shy person who needs to, like, listen, being shy was something that would destroy my whole life if I let it. There's no doubt. Okay, so one of my first jobs I had, right, I was at a clothing store. And you would think that I would be able to help people buy clothes. But they didn't want me for that job because I was way too shy. I couldn't talk to people. You know, hey, can I help you get a, you know, does that match? You got to compliment people. I'm like, compliment people? I can't do that. So my job was to go in and sort out the hangers, the plastic ones for the metal ones. Now, think about that. I've got 2 college degrees now, right? So think about it. It's not like I was stupid then, right? Like, I'm an intelligent guy. I read, I was writing, I was doing all that. But I held back so much because I was so scared of people that I was only actually valuable enough to sort out hangers. Like, and what does that do for your self-esteem? By the way, I was like 22 years old. Like, it was really bad. Like, you know.
But that could have been a situation, like way back then, when you think about it, way back then, instead of giving you the coat hanger job, your supervisor or manager is saying, you know what? You're going to work the floor.
Right, and that
You're
would have
gonna
been
do
an
this.
exceptionally good person.
And you would have been like, oh my God, like you, I mean, that could have been a different turning point.
I'm not sure if I agree with that because let's take a person like yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, that you say that you're shy, but you have other talents.
Mm-hmm.
I do,
So if
but I
I
couldn't
put
make
you in a
anybody see them.
position to try to overcome your shyness, instead of putting you in a position where I can take advantage of your skills, you're going to be a much happier employee if you're working in something. Take a person who hates dealing with people, but they're good with numbers. So you put them in the back room as an accountant. And you got somebody in the background that can't add up or anything, but is talking to everybody all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You put them up front to be your receptionist or your, you know, representing your company. So I'm not sure that forcing someone into a situation where.
Well, I didn't mean to force him. What I'm saying is that as a person too, he knew even back then that he was shy and he had,
Right.
and to go in the personal training profession to me is like, okay, that's an oxymoron because
It was the worst day of my life.
it's like,
First
okay,
day.
you have to talk to people, you have to guide people. But I also think there's control issues with personal training too, that you like to be in control. I think that's a whole nother,
Right.
whatever. But all I'm saying is that if he would have been like when I was put in the nursing home situation, it was for me. It was either I was going to make that work because I needed a job, or I was going to quit. And one of the reasons I quit working at McDonald's was because my manager kind of was disrespectful to me in front of other people. You know, that whole thing. And I'm not saying force somebody to do something that they're uncomfortable doing, but sometimes if you have to do something, like I'm sure when you got into personal training, he had to go, oh my God, okay, all shyness aside, I got to do this. I mean, this is my livelihood.
I think what you're hitting on is something that's really important, and it was definitely on our list of things. You have to find something that you really want to do, right? Like Nietzsche said, if your why is strong enough, like why do you want to do this? If the why is strong enough, the how will never matter. I didn't know that back then. I know it now. Like, that's the truth. Because after that job, let me tell you real quick, because it's so embarrassing, so I'm going to lay it for you. I had a job at Friendly's, right? And my job was basically, okay, in the back, right? You like,
remember the fribble?
You fry some clams, but you also, you scoop ice cream. Minimum wage job. I was there 2 weeks. What happened was, like, they would put me out in the front to go take somebody's order, and I was so scared of looking at people that by the time I wrote down their order, I went back and I didn't even know what I wrote down, and I didn't know who I was giving it to. So I show up for work one day after, like, the second week. Okay, and I went to the boss. I said, my name's not on the schedule. I said, he goes, no, it's not. That's how I got fired. That's how little they thought of me. They didn't even think to call me. They didn't think to tell me that, listen, you're not really working out very well, we're going to replace you. They didn't even do that. They made me go all the way there, by bus, by the way, and go in there with my stupid Friendly shirt on and go, oh, no, it's correct. You're not on. You're not working for us anymore. Like, when were you going to tell me? Well, we were hoping we were just going to leave. It's like, it was terrible. So, okay, so I didn't really love Friendlies, and I didn't really love, sorting hangers. I didn't really care about clothes. But what I did care about was training, and I loved working out. But my first week was horrific because I actually had to talk to people that were like twice my age. And then I thought, okay, but I'm going to make it work. And so I would practice, and I would practice, and I would practice. And how do you do that? By going to work. But how else do you practice? Something else you probably don't know. I used to go home and write out questions to people so I can go in and so I can repeat them when I saw them, because I was too nervous to come up with anything. Hi, how are you? Then I would write down, okay, so this is so-and-so. Okay, she's the one with 2 kids. Now, it seems like that would be easy to remember. Not easy to remember when you're shy and you're scared to death and your heart is beating really fast and you see a bunch of people. You don't know who's who. You're scared to death. You're just worried about surviving. So I would actually write it down when they left. Okay, this person's mother died, 8 years ago. They mentioned it first, so maybe I should ask them how they're doing. And that's how slow I was in order to get into personal training.
But you realized at at that point too how important that was, and even in the service business doing hair, I remember because I fill out cards on my clients, and I would put little notes on their card like that. As a young person, I would be like, I got to remember something, because that was something Dino taught me. He said, pick one thing out of their conversation, so when they come back again, they're going to think you're amazing, that you remembered that about them. So I couldn't always, like you said, you can't remember everybody. So I would just, in their formulation, I would write, something. They work at whatever. And then when they'd sit down in my chair and I'd say, hey, so how's your job going over at such and such? They go, oh my God, you remember I worked there? Yeah, I remember, And of course you develop that rapport because the client feels, so that's a good skill that you, on your own,
and
knew that you needed to.
Necessity, right? They say necessity is the mother of invention. Well, I wasn't reading books about how to get over shyness, because here's the other thing. If you listen to people too much and you listen to just the way society is, they'll have you believe that being an introvert or being on the shy side is an extreme negative. Well, it can be, but you know what? There's a lot of positives to it too. But I didn't know that. what I always thought was that there's something wrong with me, right? And I like to say, you know, about like when people say to me, you know, like, well, you came from not so good, and how'd you get better? And I'll tell them, listen, I was kind of from a poor family, and I always say, listen, I spent most of my life broke, but I've never been broken. You know, that's my little thing I like to say. But in terms of being shy, I felt like I was broken in that one area. I was like, how am I going to fix this? And I realized I can't fix it. I'm going to manage it. And as long as I manage it for a good amount of time in a row, I'm going to be fine. You know, but you have to care enough. I want to tell you a story about resilience, about when I was a kid, because, not because I'm showing off in any way, but I was thinking about it, and it has a lot of the attributes that somebody would need. And when I mean somebody, I don't want to put myself up there. I'm looking at it that it was so long ago that it's a different human being. I just know the story really well because it's me. But I was 14 years old, and by then I was already working out, and I was on the football team and all that kind of stuff. Well, one day during school it was raining, so they didn't let us outside for lunch. So we just were doing arm wrestles for like an hour. Well, so it is that I won, you know, whatever. But there was one kid, and so I ended up getting this challenge. This guy was big, and I ended up arm wrestling him. Actually, it was this arm. And we're down, and I had him about an inch from the table, but I couldn't put him down. And so I breathed a couple of times, then I put my full power into it, and I put his hand down. But on the way, everybody heard this loud crack, and that was my elbow. Oh. So I won the arm wrestle match, but it was so much force down that I broke my own arm, and I won. So I'm like, yeah, that was really good. Okay, I think I'm done for the day. But here's the weird resilience part, is that I actually walked around for 3 days with a broken elbow. My elbow had locked. So in order to get to my locker, I had to snap it in place, do the little thing and lock it. Then my arm was stuck here. I have to crack it back down again. So we go to the hospital. So I finally told my mom, you know, so we go to the hospital, and they couldn't find anything wrong with it at first. Then they called us in the next day. So now we're 4 days with a broken elbow of me snapping it into place. Okay, so that's the first part. That's the physical resilience, being able to. Did the pain matter to me? No, because I won the arm wrestle match in front of a lot of people, and I didn't want anybody to know that I broke my arm. So I walked around with it without caring much. I still was proud of it, which is, I know it's odd. But so follow the bouncing ball on this one. It was about November or so, and I remember that because in New York it snows. And I thought, okay, I can't work out now, because then I ended up getting a cast. I needed to put it on for like 6 weeks or something. I didn't have a lot of clothes, right? I told you we didn't have a lot of money, so I had a pair of jeans, actually 3 pairs of jeans that I used to rotate every other day. So I put on my one pair of jeans. I had a jacket, but I had the sling like this on my thing, and I went running in the snow in New York on the ice and snow. Why? Because I wanted to work out, and I didn't want to be out of shape. Because that's what was my
But it's
pride thing.
If it's important enough to you, I think you find the resiliency. But I also think, with me, I learned a lot of resiliency from both my parents. My dad was very resilient. Yep. He worked a bunch of jobs to make ends meet. My mother, after my parents got divorced, I watched my mother, her resiliency and not the hardships that we went through only with her, and how she would get out of situations, and how she would, continue to go to school. She would try to better herself. She never let, life get ahead of her,
Right.
So I remember being a young girl, and, we didn't have heat at one point because my mom couldn't pay the electric bill. We had our phone turned off. In Buffalo, when there's no heat, it's freaking freezing out. So, you learn to be a little, resilient, even in the elements. Like, I could probably survive out in a blizzard. I don't know if you could, but I know I would be, not now living in Vegas, but, back then I remember watching her and going, wow, this lady is unbelievable, because I don't think that a lot of people would have been able to just keep, her cars would break down. Just everything that, could go wrong.
I agree with you.
And then
there
she had
too.
my dad on the other side busting her chops all the time, So, not only was it, her realization of getting out there in the real world and trying to provide for herself and her 2 kids, because my sister and I lived with her, she's dealing with that, which that was new to my mom. You know, she never really worked, and then dealing with the obstacles of the finances, and you know,
Yep.
so
No,
you
I
learn
hear
to
you.
be. And that's my mother's thing all the way. You know, she'd always say, you know, you either survive or you die, and she goes, I'm a survivor, and she goes, and so are you. You know, you find a way to make things work. And Ava, she'll say, her boss said to her the other day, well, where's your mom? Like, what's the deal? Like, then when they called you, because this girl couldn't figure out why Ava couldn't find me, and she goes, my mom's at one of her jobs. And the lady goes, one of her jobs, what does she do? And Ava says she's a stylist and she's a personal trainer. So I never know if she's going to be at the gym or she's going to be at the salon or where she is. You know, so I mean, I'm even teaching my daughter, you know, resiliency,
that's
you
a
know,
big
to
part of
some,
it.
you know, you can do more than one thing. You've got to, you know, do things.
Yeah, and listen, you know how I feel about my mom. She was extremely resilient, and also she was a single mom. Some of her friends were single moms. So if you want to ask me where I get, like, you know, my resilience and strength, it's from single moms, as weird as that sounds, right? Also, you know, my father also had this way about him that if there was a challenge to be had, and that's another thing about resilience too, is to actually look forward to the challenge as a way to get better. So I remember we were at this, I competed at this bodybuilding show. It ended up being a blizzard, and nobody could get out of the place. Like, it was, I mean, the streets were, you know, this is even before the plows were there. So my dad comes in, he's like, well, you ready to go? And he was just so, he had, you know, like a glass of water in his hand and stuff, and he's one hand on the steering wheel. And this is like way before you hear about all these shows about Tokyo Drift and all this. My dad's like, shh, you know, and the cars slide to the right, slide to the left real slow, and he's just talking his way through going, see, when you do it like this, you got to turn real slow into the back. And he's just going like that, and I'm like, this is crazy. We're the only ones out on the road. And my dad has this big smile on his face, like, this is like the coolest thing. And I realized it many years later of what that feeling is. And what that feeling is, at least to me, it's being able to be like masterful at something and to be able to prove how great you are when everybody else is on the sidelines just going, I can't do that.
Well, and I think the resilience part of it too is when things don't go your way. And this is another thing with the kids today too, because everything is instant gratification. They're used to everything going their way most of the time, or at least a lot of the time being told how amazing they are.
Right.
So I don't think you can build resiliency as effectively by being told all the time, or being coddled, or being like things accepted. You know, that, what do they call that? The status quo, just so that you don't have to have a conflict.
Right.
So that doesn't build resiliency either.
No, not at all. You got to be honest. I mean, you can love your child, and at the same sense, say, listen, you need to be corrected here and there. I remember in a boxing match, I think I told you this a while back, but I felt a little bit dizzy after the boxing match. You know, I mean, I did well. You know, I won, but I told my mom, like, yeah, I got a little dizzy there. She said, well, either you better learn how to stop getting hit, or you better be able to hit that guy a lot harder so he stops hitting you. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't like she was, you know, I mean, she cared, but it wasn't like she was like, oh my God, my son has a headache after a boxing match. You know, let me put a helmet on him. You know, she was just like, yeah, you better learn how to defend yourself a little better. You know, real simple. And by the way, the running thing I was telling you about, okay, so picture this kid real quick, okay? I had a broken arm with a sling on. And today's day, everybody would say, you're going to run out in the snow and ice? You're going to fall and break your other arm, right? No, my mom was like, good, go ahead and do it. I was running all the time when my arm was in that sling. By the time spring rolled around, I actually finished the Long Island Marathon, 26.2 miles that I was able to do. So there's your resilience. I broke my arm. I stopped my bodybuilding stuff for a while, but then I ended up being a marathon runner. And then I ended up being the captain of the track team. So, you know, it just kind of goes. Do you mind if I go over part of the study?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, because this is a great, I got a whole bunch
How old
of
is the
stuff.
study?
The book actually came out in 1962, but I like it then because there was no social media. So this is some real stuff. The people in it are people like Eleanor Roosevelt. You know, they did stuff like that.
If you remember the 60s, you weren't really there.
Well, I was
John.
born at 65, and you don't remember it. So here's a study of the childhoods of 400 successful people. How do they define success? by being a positive contributor to the world and to have at least 2 biographies written about you. So that's pretty high standard right there, right? 2 biographies. That's huge. All right, so they take the successful people. What they've realized was 15% lived in a supportive home. You should be tracking the numbers with me right now. That means 85% lived in either with severe problems or a mixed setting. Actually, it says only 10% lived in a mixed setting. So that puts 75% of the top successful people in this world came from severe problems. So the quote from it, I missed his name. I should have said Victor Goertzel and his wife, Mildred Goertzel. He worked with gifted children, and she worked with emotionally disturbed children. So they put their work together, and this is what they came up with. And it's still used today, by the way. Their quote from it, "The normal person is definitely not a candidate for the Hall of Fame." Which, that's not from me. So that's why I put quotes around normal, because by today's standards, people have a problem with saying if you're normal or not. But back then, I guess it was okay to say that. So they said the normal person is not a candidate for the Hall of Fame. They said characteristics to identify a gifted child is they don't like school, they don't like their teachers, they're opinionated, and they don't seem to get along in the world. Think about that, right? So when we start thinking about kids, they're the nonconformists. Exactly right. Here's another quote from it. "The only thing worse than a terrible childhood is having a childhood that is too good." And so now as things go, this is why I love this book. When we see it today, now we're coddling our children. We're seeing a massive amount of suicides, a massive amount of drug abuse, a massive amount of kids sitting around saying, "I don't know who I am, I don't know what I like, the only thing I like are video games." Why do you like video games? Because it's a false level of achievement. You're not doing anything with your life, right? And there's nobody sitting there saying, "Oh, you failed," right? You don't build up self-esteem in any way. So it's all fake. Let me give you this other study if I can. Chime in anytime you want. I know we don't have a lot of time, so I want to get through some of this. This is a 40-year longitudinal study with a bunch of people all from Kauai, which I guess is Hawaii? Hawaii. Now they took 700 babies, then they assessed them at 1 year old, 2 years old, 10 years old, 18, 32, and 40 years old. Okay, so it's continuous for 40 years. They locked in 130 of them of being extreme high risk with many childhood adversities. At the 40-year mark, what they said is that of these high risk babies, 33% fared equally or better than their affluent peers. Now, no, that's not 100, but it's 1/3. So they went back to them and they started asking questions so we can formulate, what is it that did it? So here is the resilience prescription according to this study. Number 1, be an active problem solver. And I think Heidi and I showed you that today. If you care enough about your life or something, you'll figure it out. Mm-hmm. You'll be a kid with a sling on your arm running through the ice, right? You'll do that, the things that you've done. Number 2, determination is a virtue. As you go through it, it talks about a few of these people saying that they refused to lose because they already started off as losers in terms of society, so they had nothing more to lose. So they would just keep pounding through, and then what they would do, probably the greatest thing I think personally of how they got better, they were able to seek out people who loved and cared about them. Mm-hmm. Think about
Find
that.
a role model. All the books that you read, and that's one of the things that I tell people. You know what? And I have this conversation with mothers a lot, and I'm a mom, and we all have these egos when we're parents. Why can't I get through to my kid? What is wrong with me as a parent that I can't get through? And my thing is it doesn't really matter where our children get the message, because for some reason kids always want to listen to somebody else before they listen to their own parents. And my thing is if the child's listening to somebody else and they're getting the message from somebody else and it's a good one, who cares where they're getting it from?
Absolutely.
And I've said this to girls that are, problem girls, they're always in trouble and they have issues, and it's like, you can play the victim the rest of your life, or why don't you just pick a role model? Pick somebody that you like, somebody that you look up to, and be with them for the good influences that you need in your life. Why does it have to be do it on your own, or you're going to do it not well?
No, you're exactly
You know.
right. It seems so easy, right? But part of that is that you have to believe in yourself to do that, and to be told that if you have a type of childhood, or even as you got older, you lined yourself up with people, or you were born into a situation where the people around you are not very supportive. According to this study, pick your own. This gives you a chance to find people who really do support you. If you, whatever you want to do, find a good boss, that wants you to do well at work, that's going to go, let's say that you're too shy. They'll find something else better for you to do. There are good bosses out there. There are good people out there. There are people that you can make your own family. I know we don't have a lot of time. Let me pick out this other 2010 study from the Journal of Abnormal Psychology. John's gonna hopefully like this one.
My favorite.
Abnormal psychology.
He's abnormal.
81 adults. This is with 81 adults, and the reason why it's not as many is because these people were political prisoners at some point, and so it was difficult to get that many that were still alive, to be honest with you. They went through severe mental abuse, severe physical abuse. They had no control over their life, of what was going on in any way, shape, or form. They were held in the dark, sometimes for days at a time. Their food was obviously, all of it was based
Control.
upon somebody else. So every breath you took was, you didn't know what was going to happen. So decades later, they said 2/3 of these people were still meeting heavily the criteria for PTSD, which is horrible. But that's not what the study's about. The study's about how we can hopefully learn and get better. So let's talk about the 33% that do not have PTSD supposedly anymore, or just a low level. What they said was, and when they interviewed these people, obviously not all in the same room, but as they were figuring all this out, almost to a person, they all said the same thing. When my life wasn't my own, they still can't take me away from me. It's the number one thing is, and I put it in big letters here because I didn't want to forget this term, inner defiance. You can be mean, you can be evil, you can tell me when I can eat, sleep, drink, what I can talk, but I still got 2 middle fingers for you inside my soul, still towards you. And so they never lost who they were. They always cared about themselves and what was going to happen about them. And they never felt...
You could say that even with abused children when they're being verbally
why I'm
abused
saying this,
and all
yes.
that there's a defiant part in them that they would say, you can keep me quiet now, but you're not going to keep me quiet forever.
Right.
And that's what I always call that more of a survival thing, because they're survivors. My mother, that's the term she uses, you're a survivor. Mm-hmm. So you learn to just get through it by respecting yourself.
Yeah, what's interesting, and at some point we'll turn this around and talk about some of the things that are happening today with all this supposed sexual abuse. Some of it really is sexual abuse. Some of it is just, we'll talk about that later. But listen, if it's 25, 30 years later and it still bothers you that somebody said something to you,
well,
it's kind of
I
an
think there should be a
interesting
statute of limitations on that. I think that after so much time, you know what,
but nobody can make you
can't
feel dirty, right? That's the point. Like after 30 years or something, somebody still feels dirty because somebody said a bad word to them. It makes no sense in terms of this. And here's a quote from one of the people from these 81 political prisoners, and this is really important to remember. This person said, "I refuse to accept what they said about me was true." Mm-hmm. Think about that. For everybody who's been physically abused, mentally abused, sexually abused, that's all people from the outside encroaching upon your uniqueness as a human being. The only time that it ever really affects you is if you believe that you're a bad human being for somebody else doing bad things, which really in the sense of it makes no sense when you think about it. So we have got a ton more to say about this subject because it's a really huge subject that can help a lot of people, but that's going to have to wait for another time. So I hope you learned some of that. I think we gave about 10 resilience prescriptions that you can just literally do, and then you could follow some of the stuff that Heidi and I said, and not just to put us on a pedestal, but in your own life, think about the things that you were willing to do to get the job done in your life. Thank you. That was fun. This has been the Rise Above show.
Bye, everybody.